Imagine walking into a grand London gala where everything is measured. The lighting, the tailoring, the way someone holds a champagne glass. Reputation moves faster than conversation in rooms like this. Now imagine entering quietly. No announcement. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to be noticed. Just presence. Across the marble floor, conversations hum beneath crystal chandeliers. Laughter rises in polished waves. Status is displayed subtly, through designer labels, exclusive invitations, whispered connections. And then there's the quiet guest. Not dressed poorly. Not dressed loudly either. Simply composed. Have you ever noticed how the loudest rooms are often the most insecure? Near the center of attention stands a young woman, confident, charismatic, raised in privilege. The daughter of a billionaire hosting the event. She knows the hierarchy of the room. Or at least she thinks she does. Her eyes scan the guest. She evaluates, categorizes, dismisses, and then they land on him. A man standing calmly near the balcony doors, observing the skyline instead of the spotlight. In this fictional scenario inspired by the grounded public image of Keanu Reeves, the quiet guest doesn't radiate celebrity energy. He radiates something else. Stillness. Have you ever seen someone so comfortable in themselves that they don't compete for space? That's what unsettles her. Because in environments built on performance, stillness can feel like defiance. She approaches with a polished smile, the kind designed to test, not to welcome. A casual remark. A subtle assumption. A question wrapped in superiority. Nothing overtly cruel. Nothing dramatic. Just a social pressure test. And here's the real question. When someone challenges your status in a room designed to measure worth, do you react? Or do you remain composed? The music continues. The skyline glows. Conversations flow around them. But in that small pocket of space between two people, something far more interesting begins to unfold. Not confrontation. Not humiliation. But perception meeting reality. And in rooms like this, perception is everything. The thing about high society gatherings isn't the luxury. It's the unspoken rules. Rooms like this operate on silent agreements. Who belongs, who impresses, who leads conversation, and who simply observes. It's rarely about what's said directly. It's about posture, tone, timing. This gala wasn't hostile. It wasn't aggressive. But it was layered. In social environments shaped by wealth and reputation, pressure doesn't come from shouting. It comes from subtle testing. From the small pauses after a question. From the raised eyebrow that implies more than words ever could. The billionaire's daughter had grown up in these spaces. She understood influence the way others understand weather, instinctively. She could sense shifts in attention. She knew how to guide a room. How to redirect conversation. How to quietly diminish someone without appearing impolite. And that's where the tension truly lived. Not in confrontation, but in calibration. The quiet guest, inspired by the public persona often associated with Keanu Reeves, didn't attempt to dominate the space. He didn't overcompensate. He didn't introduce himself with resume highlights. He simply stood comfortably within himself. There's something disarming about that. Reeves has often been described in interviews as reserved, reflective, even introverted despite global fame. Known for intense preparation in films like John Wick, he has spoken about discipline, repetition, and respect for craft. Always in the context of filmmaking. That's important. This story isn't about real-life combat skill. It isn't about dominance. It's about composure under social pressure. Because pressure doesn't only exist in prisons or boardrooms. It exists at dinner tables, at networking events, at weddings, at family gatherings, anywhere hierarchy can be implied. The daughter's comment was polished, almost playful. Are you with someone? Or just enjoying the view? On the surface, harmless. Underneath, a signal. A way of measuring status without directly asking, who are you? He didn't answer immediately. Not because he was intimidated, but because he was listening. Listening to tone. Listening to intention. Listening to the subtle test beneath the smile. Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable silence can make people who rely on quick reactions? In that pause, the dynamic shifted slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. He responded calmly. Briefly. No elaboration. No defensive energy. And that lack of defensiveness created something unexpected. Curiosity. Because in rooms driven by ego, people expect one of two reactions when they probe. Either insecurity or aggression. But what happens when they receive neither? The daughter wasn't cruel. She wasn't villainous. She was accustomed to control. And control feels safest when others play along. But the quiet guest wasn't playing. He wasn't competing either. He was simply present. And presence, real presence, can feel unsettling when you're used to performance. The gala continued around them. Laughter echoed. Glasses clinked. Music rose and fell in elegant waves. Yet in that small exchange, a psychological chess match had quietly begun. Not to win. Not to embarrass. But to observe. Because sometimes the most revealing moments don't come from what someone says loudly. They come from how they respond when tested softly. And in that room, filled with curated identities and polished reputations, the most grounded person might just be the one who feels no need to prove anything at all. The space between them didn't feel hostile. It felt measured. Around them, the gala flowed effortlessly, a carefully choreographed display of influence and elegance. Conversations overlapped like soft jazz. Laughter rose, then dissolved into the hum of networking. But here, in this small corner near the balcony, something quieter was unfolding. The billionaire's daughter tilted her head slightly. Not dismissively, analytically. She was recalculating. Most guests, when approached with subtle social pressure, respond predictably. They either over-explain themselves, listing credentials as if reading from a resume, or they retreat, shrinking slightly under the implied hierarchy. He did neither. Instead, he maintained eye contact, not intense, not challenging, just steady. Have you ever noticed how steady eye contact can say more than a confident speech? There was no attempt to impress. No effort to shift attention back onto himself. His posture remained relaxed, shoulders loose, breath even. That's when the dynamic subtly shifted again. Because in environments where status is currency, control often belongs to the person who reacts least. The daughter tried a different angle, a refined conversational pivot. So how do you know the host? It sounded light, casual. But it wasn't small talk. It was positioning. In rooms like this, connections define relevance. If you belong, it's because someone important invited you. If you hesitate, it's because you're unsure of your place. He paused, but not awkwardly. Deliberately. As if the question itself deserved respect. Then he answered in a tone so calm it almost blended with the music. I've known the family for some time. Nothing more. No elaboration. No name-dropping. No self-promotion. Just enough. And that restraint created tension. Not explosive tension, but intellectual tension. Because now she couldn't categorize him. Was he influential? Private? Old money? New money? Or simply uninterested in proving anything? Uncertainty is uncomfortable for people accustomed to reading rooms instantly. Her smile flickered, not negatively, just briefly. A micro-expression of recalibration. She adjusted her stance, mirroring him unconsciously. Slowing her own gestures. Matching his pace. It's fascinating how quickly people adapt to composure. The conversation could have escalated socially, sharper remarks, subtle dismissals, strategic charm. But it didn't. Because he wasn't providing friction. He wasn't feeding ego. He wasn't pushing back. He was absorbing the energy and returning neutrality. That's a powerful psychological skill, one often associated with disciplined performers. Publicly, figures like Keanu Reeves have been described as grounded despite intense global recognition. In interviews, Reeves often credits preparation and patience for maintaining balance under scrutiny, especially during high-pressure productions like John Wick. Again, this story is fictional. But the emotional principle is real. When someone expects performance and receives composure instead, they begin to question their own approach. The daughter's tone softened, not submissive, just curious now. You don't seem particularly impressed by all this. It wasn't accusatory. It was observational. And beneath it was something unexpected. Interest. Because here's the truth about high-status environments. The rarest quality in the room isn't wealth. It's authenticity. He glanced briefly toward the skyline. It's a beautiful evening, he replied. Not dismissing the gala. Not validating it either. Just grounding the moment in something real. Outside the ballroom, the city lights stretched endlessly, indifferent to social hierarchies, untouched by curated reputations. Inside, something subtle had changed. The test was no longer about him. It had become about her. Not in a confrontational way, but in a reflective one. Because when someone refuses to compete for status, it forces others to confront why they value it so highly in the first place. And that realization is far more powerful than any public victory. The music softened as the evening moved into its later rhythm. Champagne glasses were refreshed. Conversations deepened. The room felt warmer now, not in temperature but in tone. What had begun as a subtle test no longer felt like one. It felt like curiosity. The billionaire's daughter studied him again, but this time without calculation. There was something steady about his presence that resisted categorization. He wasn't trying to be mysterious. He simply wasn't performing. And in a room built on performance, that was rare. A small group nearby shifted, making space as an older gentleman approached, one of the senior advisors to the hosting family. His presence carried quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need introduction. He smiled when he saw the quiet guest. Not a polite society smile. A familiar one. "Ah, there you are," he said warmly. "I was hoping you made it." The daughter's posture changed almost imperceptibly. Not stiff. Just attentive. The advisor continued casually, as if discussing something entirely ordinary. "We've finalized the paperwork for the Kensington property. Everything should be processed by Monday. I appreciate your patience." The words floated lightly in the air. Kensington property. Paperwork. Processed. There was no announcement. No dramatic pause. Just information. The quiet guest nodded once. "Thank you. I trust everything is in order." "It always is," the advisor replied with a respectful chuckle. "After all, it's your building." And there it was. Not a revelation delivered for effect. Not a correction meant to embarrass. Simply a clarification. The daughter didn't gasp. She didn't react theatrically. She absorbed it. Because now the assumptions rearranged themselves silently in her mind. The guest she had subtly measured, the man she had tested with polished questions, wasn't a random attendee navigating the room. He owned the property where her family offices operated. Not in a boastful way. Not in a competitive way. Just factually. The shift in atmosphere wasn't explosive. It was internal. Have you ever felt a moment where your perspective adjusts instantly, not because someone shamed you, but because reality quietly corrected you? That's what this was. He hadn't defended himself. Hadn't elevated his voice. Hadn't offered credentials when tested. He simply allowed perception to run its course. And now perception had realigned. The advisor moved on to greet other guests, leaving a brief stillness between them. The daughter exhaled slowly, a subtle release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. "I didn't realize," she said gently. It wasn't an apology. It was acknowledgement. He offered a small smile. "There's no reason you would." No edge. No satisfaction. Just calm truth. In that moment, the dynamic equalized, not because of status but because of awareness. The gala continued as if nothing had happened. Music swelled again. A photographer adjusted lighting across the room. Conversations resumed in layered waves. But something important had shifted. Not power. Understanding. She could have responded defensively. She could have overcorrected with excessive respect. She could have withdrawn. Instead, she chose something far more mature. Curiosity. "What do you look for," she asked thoughtfully, "when you invest in a place like this?" Now the conversation had transformed. It was no longer about social positioning. It was about insight. He answered simply. Long-term value. Community impact. Stability. No arrogance. No lecture. Just measured perspective. The irony was subtle but powerful. The person who had felt in control at the beginning of the exchange had been operating on surface impressions. The one who seemed unassuming had been operating on patience. And patience in rooms like this is rare. This fictional scenario, inspired loosely by the grounded public persona of Keanu Reeves, isn't about wealth or status. It's about restraint. It's about allowing assumptions to exist without rushing to correct them. Because when someone reveals their character under pressure, it says more than any introduction ever could. The daughter hadn't been humiliated. She had been educated. Quietly. And perhaps that's more powerful than public embarrassment ever could be. The skyline beyond the balcony shimmered against the dark London sky. Inside, beneath crystal chandeliers and curated reputations, a simple truth had emerged. The strongest shift in a room doesn't happen when someone raises their voice. It happens when reality speaks for itself. And often it does so softly. If this moment had been recorded on someone's phone, clipped into a 30-second highlight and posted online, the reaction would have been predictable. Headlines would frame it as confrontation. Comment sections would divide instantly. Who embarrassed who? Who had more power? Who won? But that question, who won, would completely miss what actually happened. Because nothing about this exchange was designed to create a winner. It was designed to reveal character. In modern culture, especially online, we tend to interpret every social interaction as a contest. Someone must dominate. Someone must lose face. Someone must be put in their place. Why? because conflict is clickable. But composure isn't loud enough for algorithms. In reality, what unfolded at that gala wasn't humiliation. It was recalibration. The billionaire's daughter didn't collapse socially. She didn't retreat in shame. She wasn't publicly corrected or theatrically exposed. She simply realized she had misjudged someone. And he didn't leverage that realization for superiority. That distinction matters. There's a significant difference between being right and proving someone wrong. One inflates ego. The other requires restraint. If you think about it, ego demands witnesses. Restraint doesn't. The internet often amplifies moments stripped of nuance. A raised eyebrow becomes an insult. A pause becomes tension. A neutral response becomes cold dominance. But in reality, the most powerful shifts are internal. In that room, the shift wasn't about property ownership. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about status hierarchy reversing itself. It was about perception meeting truth without theatrics. And that's rare. We live in a time where identity is often curated for display. Social media rewards presentation. Gala events reward performance. Conversations sometimes become strategic exchanges rather than genuine dialogue. So when someone refuses to perform, it disrupts the rhythm. Not aggressively, but meaningfully. The quiet guest didn't correct assumptions immediately because he didn't need validation. That's the key. People who are secure in their position rarely rush to announce it. They don't fill silence to avoid discomfort. They don't react defensively to subtle challenges. They let time reveal context. And context is powerful. Imagine if the story had unfolded differently. Imagine he had responded to the daughter's early probing with status references. I own this building. I'm responsible for the property your family leases. Technically factual, but strategically unnecessary. That approach would have changed the tone entirely. It would have turned a subtle exchange into a power play. And then yes, the internet could have declared a winner. But what would that prove? That ego can escalate faster than patience? Instead, something quieter happened. The realization arrived organically. And because it arrived naturally, it carried more weight. The daughter's adjustment in tone wasn't fear-based. It was awareness-based. There's maturity in that. We often assume privilege eliminates reflection. But awareness can exist anywhere, if someone is willing to engage it. The interesting part of this story isn't that she misjudged him. It's that she adapted when new information appeared. And the interesting part about him isn't that he held power. It's that he didn't use it as leverage. That's discipline. Not cinematic discipline. Not dramatic dominance. Just emotional steadiness. And emotional steadiness is deeply underestimated in modern storytelling. If this were framed as a viral clip, the caption might read, "Billionaire's daughter silenced after discovering quiet guest owns building." That framing would drive views. But it would distort the truth. Because no one was silenced. No one was crushed socially. The only thing that shifted was perspective. And perspective shifts are subtle. They don't trend easily. But they matter. Ask yourself something honest. When was the last time you corrected someone gently instead of proving them wrong loudly? When was the last time you allowed someone to discover truth rather than forcing it on them? Those moments rarely make headlines. But they build something more durable than applause. They build respect. Real respect doesn't come from dominance. It comes from consistency. The gala didn't end in spectacle. It ended in conversation. And perhaps that's the quiet lesson hidden beneath the surface. Strength isn't the ability to overpower a room. It's the ability to remain unchanged by its pressure. The internet might ask, who won? But maybe that question reveals more about us than about them. Because sometimes the most powerful presence in a room isn't the one who asserts control. It's the one who never needed to. The gala continued long after that quiet exchange. Music swelled. Glasses clinked. Conversations drifted from business to travel to art. On the surface, nothing dramatic had happened. No confrontation. No spectacle. No raised voices. And yet, something meaningful had unfolded. Not in the room. In the mindset. Because the real shift wasn't about property ownership or social hierarchy. It was about emotional discipline. Slow down for a moment. Think about how most people respond when they feel underestimated. There's a reflex. A tightening in the chest. A subtle urge to prove. A desire to correct immediately. We rush to defend identity because we equate misunderstanding with disrespect. But what if it's not? What if being misjudged is simply an opportunity to observe? The quiet guest, in this fictional narrative inspired by the grounded public image of Keanu Reeves, didn't rush to reclaim status. He didn't interrupt assumptions mid-formation. He didn't lean on reputation. He allowed time to do the work. That requires patience. And patience is uncomfortable, especially in environments built on speed and impression. In films like John Wick, audiences see choreography, precision, intensity. But behind those performances, interviews often highlight something else. Repetition, training, discipline, preparation. Not chaos. Control. And control in real life doesn't look dramatic. It looks calm. Strength isn't loud. Read that again. Strength isn't loud. Confidence isn't aggressive. And discipline doesn't need witnesses. We often confuse volume with power. The loudest voice in a room appears dominant. The quickest response appears intelligent. The sharpest comeback appears victorious. But are those reactions actually signs of strength? Or are they signs of insecurity trying to protect itself? The daughter's early assumptions weren't malicious. They were habitual. She operated within a system that rewarded visible markers of status. Designer labels. Recognizable surnames. Immediate introductions. That's not evil. It's conditioning. And conditioning shapes perception more than we realize. The deeper lesson here isn't about her being corrected. It's about both individuals adjusting in real time. He adjusted by choosing restraint over reaction. She adjusted by choosing curiosity over defensiveness. That's maturity on both sides. Now bring this closer to your own life. Think about a time someone underestimated you. At work. At school. In your own family. Did you feel the urge to prove yourself instantly? Most people do. Because silence feels like surrender. But sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes composure speaks more clearly than explanation ever could. Ask yourself, when was the last time you let your work speak instead of your words? When was the last time you stayed grounded while someone projected assumptions onto you? It's difficult. Because ego wants acknowledgement. Ego wants validation. Ego wants the room to know. But discipline waits. Discipline trusts timing. There's a subtle confidence in knowing your value without broadcasting it. That kind of confidence doesn't fluctuate with opinion. It doesn't spike when praised or collapse when doubted. It remains steady. And steadiness is rare. The billionaire's daughter likely went home that evening thinking about that exchange. Not because she was embarrassed, but because she encountered something uncommon. Someone who didn't play the expected game. And the quiet guest likely left without replaying the moment at all. Because for him it wasn't a battle. It was simply an interaction. That's the difference between ego-driven moments and grounded ones. Ego replays. Grounded people release. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many of us measure strength externally. Titles, income, influence, recognition. But real strength shows up internally. In breath control when tension rises. In tone control when challenged. In emotional regulation when tested. And that's far harder than winning an argument. You can overpower someone verbally in seconds. But mastering your own reaction? That can take years. The gala wasn't a battlefield. It was a mirror. A mirror reflecting how people respond when hierarchy feels uncertain. Some assert. Some retreat. Some observe. And the observer often learns the most. The strongest person in the room isn't always the most visible. Sometimes it's the one who can walk through assumptions without absorbing them. The one who doesn't shrink when overlooked. The one who doesn't expand artificially when acknowledged. Just steady. Just grounded. So here's the question that matters. If someone misjudged you tomorrow, would you need to correct them immediately? Or could you trust that truth reveals itself over time? Because in the long run, consistency outlasts performance. And quiet discipline outlasts loud dominance. That's not cinematic. It's not viral. But it's real. And real strength doesn't require applause. It requires control. By the time the evening began to wind down, the energy in the ballroom had softened. Conversations were no longer strategic. They were relaxed. Ties loosened slightly. Laughter felt less curated. The skyline outside remained unchanged, steady light stretching across the London night, indifferent to social hierarchies and private assumptions. And that's the final irony of the story. The city doesn't care who felt powerful inside a ballroom. It simply exists. The gala will be remembered differently by everyone who attended. Some will recall business discussions. Some will remember the music. Some will remember who wore what. But the most meaningful moment of the evening wasn't on stage. It wasn't photographed. It wasn't announced. It happened quietly between two people adjusting their perspectives. That's where real change often begins. Not in spectacle. In awareness. If this fictional scenario, inspired by the calm public image often associated with Keanu Reeves, teaches anything, it's this. Power doesn't always look the way we expect it to. We are conditioned to recognize strength through volume, through dominance, through immediate correction. But what if the strongest presence in a room is the one that doesn't react? What if composure is a higher form of control? Let's pause here, because this is where everything shifts. Most people believe strength is about winning visible battles. But visible battles are temporary. Emotional discipline is permanent. Think about how often we enter rooms already prepared to defend ourselves, prepared to prove competence, prepared to signal worth. We carry invisible armor, titles, achievements, affiliations. And when someone fails to acknowledge those markers, we feel threatened. Why? Because we rely on external recognition to confirm internal value. The quiet guest in this story didn't rely on recognition, not because he lacked status, but because he wasn't defined by it. There's a difference. When identity is anchored internally, it doesn't shake under external pressure. When identity depends on perception, it fluctuates constantly. The billionaire's daughter experienced something subtle but important that night. She encountered someone who did not respond to hierarchy. Not rebelliously, not submissively, simply neutrally. That neutrality forced reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable when you're used to control. But discomfort isn't defeat. It's growth. The most powerful part of the story isn't that she misjudged him. It's that she adjusted once she understood. And the most powerful part about him isn't that he owned the building. It's that he didn't use that fact as a weapon. That's restraint. Restraint is often misunderstood as weakness. But restraint requires confidence. You can only afford to stay calm when you are secure in who you are. If you constantly need validation, silence feels unbearable. If you constantly need to prove yourself, patience feels like loss. But when you trust your own value, time becomes an ally. And here's the deeper layer. In life, many people will misjudge you. They will underestimate you. They will categorize you incorrectly. Some will do it unintentionally. Some will do it strategically. You can't control that. What you can control is your response. You can escalate. You can over-explain. You can react emotionally. You can remain grounded. And grounded people move differently. They don't chase recognition. They don't shrink under dismissal. They don't inflate under praise. They stay consistent. Consistency builds quiet authority. And quiet authority doesn't demand space. It naturally occupies it. Maybe the strongest person in the room isn't the one who wins. Maybe it's the one who doesn't need to. Read that slowly. Because that idea challenges how most of us measure success. Winning proves something to others. Not needing to win proves something to yourself. There's freedom in that. Freedom from constant comparison. Freedom from ego-driven reactions. Freedom from the exhausting cycle of proving worth. Imagine walking into any room, work, social events, difficult conversations, with that mindset. Not defensive. Not dominant. Just steady. How differently would you respond to criticism? How differently would you handle being underestimated? How differently would you speak? The world often celebrates dramatic victories. But personal growth usually happens in quiet decisions. The decision not to react. The decision not to escalate. The decision to let truth surface naturally. That kind of discipline doesn't trend online, but it transforms lives offline. The gala ended without incident. No scandal. No confrontation. No viral clip. Just two people leaving with slightly expanded awareness. And maybe that's enough. Because strength isn't loud. Confidence isn't aggressive. And real discipline doesn't require witnesses. If this perspective changed how you see power, even slightly, then the story already served its purpose. Not as entertainment, but as reflection. And sometimes reflection is far more powerful than applause.